button. 3, 2, 1. All right, and I think we are live. Welcome, everybody. We're celebrating National Coding Week with live coding lessons throughout this week. I'm Fede, Community Manager at Code Academy, and this with me is Ben, Senior Curriculum Developer at Code Academy. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about Ben, and then I'll hand it over to him. Ben is focused on building mobile development content like our iOS developer career path. Before Code Academy, he started out as a middle school math teacher at Teach for America, and after that, he worked as a program manager at nonprofit coding bootcamp, where he taught himself how to code. Since then, he's been an iOS instructor, developer, and a director of curriculum. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, great to be here. Really excited for this live stream. Hi to everyone watching now live, and hi to everyone who's watching the recording later. I'm really excited to get into some portfolio building today. So over the course of the live stream today, we're going to be building out a tech portfolio using HTML and then adding some CSS to give it a little bit of style. We're going to have another session on Wednesday where we're going to pick up where we left off and then take the portfolio to the next level by adding some JavaScript to make it interactive with the dark mode. If you don't already know, a tech portfolio is your ticket to getting a coding job. It's where you can showcase your skills, experience, what makes you unique, and the kind of coding projects that you're most proud of. So really excited to be building this out for us here over the course of these couple live streams. On Friday, we're going to teach you how to build one of our most popular portfolio projects that explores NBA data. So make sure to check out the portfolio projects page for some more information. As we are going and building out our content here today, feel free to ask questions. So we're monitoring chat. So you can see now people are asking how long the live stream is going for. Each live stream will be an hour. So we'll have 1 hour of a live stream on today, on Wednesday, and on Friday. I can look and help answer questions. We also have 2 curriculum developers, Lucas and Kenny, will be monitoring questions as well. And we'll take some questions as they come up while we're over the course of building content. For more details on what we're doing for National Coding Week, you can check out the link in the YouTube description that you're watching from here. So again, super excited to be here to be helping build this out and showing you a little bit about what you can do with HTML and CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Code Academy platform right here. And so what we're looking at right now is just the Code Academy homepage. Now, we're going to be building out our portfolio using the Workspaces feature inside of Code Academy. If you have Pro, great, you already have an account, you can get right into it. If you don't, it might ask you to make a free account, and then you can go and build your own workspace. So I'm going to just click on this blank workspace and end up with whatever defaults we get here. And I'll take the link that I get from this. If you want to follow along as we're building it, you can certainly do that. So this is the link here to the workspace that I'm going to be working in. You can either be following along here, following along with the link as we're building things, putting your own up, or just watching to get a sense of what we're building here. Now, if you already have some background in HTML and CSS, fantastic. You'll have a little bit more context for what we're building and why we're building it. If you don't, that's great too. I'm going to be going pretty slow over some of the foundational concepts and really trying to make sure that I'm explaining how stuff on this left part of the screen ends up making a website. So we're going to be going from nuts and bolts to be building out our portfolio website. Now, let's start here. What is a portfolio website? Well, why might we want to be building something? So as we said earlier, portfolio website's a great place to be showcasing who you are as a developer once you're ready to start talking to prospective employers. Now, you can make anything a portfolio website. Some people have been very creative and done things like made side-scrolling games their portfolio website, which is very creative. It's most standard to have a portfolio that's just going to show yourself, a bio, and some list of accomplishments that you have with some links to projects you've worked on before. I've actually, we here at Code Academy have asked our design team to build out a portfolio that they think represents a really well-designed personal portfolio. And this here is what we're going to be working towards in the live stream. They built this here using a tool called Figma. And so that's a tool recently owned by Adobe or bought by Adobe that you can use to build out designs. There are many tools that you can be using to build out portfolios. This is just one of them. It helps to have an idea in your mind of what you're looking to build before you get started. You certainly can just start messing around and organically finding out how you want to be building your portfolio, but taking the time beforehand to try to write out a little bit of what your end stage is and where you're going to will make your work a lot easier because you have that clear goal in mind. So this is what our Codecademy designers have put together for a well-designed portfolio. So we can see here that we have our bio section up at the top. We have this header and footer at the bottom. We've got some recent work that has our projects, that has some links to where you can find them, that has some nice images. And that's our portfolio that we're going to be working towards. Okay, this is just what we're going to be working towards for this particular live stream. You can make whatever you want to. You can have your own artistic vision that you're putting into what your own portfolio should look like. So this is using a tool called Figma. We're not going to be getting into it a ton for all of the features and how to actually use Figma to build things in this live stream. We do have a course on Codecademy that goes into much more detail about UI, UX design, and Figma. And I think we can get a link to that in the chat that you can take and look at if you're interested in finding out more about how to use this tool. Okay, so Figma here, we're just using as like a PDF. So we're not going to be sharing this here with you, but we're going to be using it as a baseline for what we're building. Okay. So let's take a look here at where we're starting in our application. So we have our initial workspace that is built out here. We have our panel on the left with our HTML, and we have how it's rendered, which is our website. Now, this is a website. So we have successfully built, just by clicking that new workspace button, a website. It's not hosted in the place that we can share yet, and we have more information on Codecademy about how you can actually put it and host it on something like GitHub Pages or your own server so that anyone can find it more easily. But this is a website. It has text, it has colors, it has some things that you might expect from it. Let's take a look at the HTML and figure out what exactly is this here and how does this work. So we can see that we have recognizable text somewhere inside this mess of different colors that ends up on the right panel here. This hello world shows up on the left side and on the right side. As we change our text to say hello live stream, and then we click the save and run button, or which if I'm not moving my mouse, I'm going to just clicking command return because I'm on a Mac, or it would be control return on a PC. You can see that the text updates. So all of this text here that shows up, you can just update, and you are building a website here with just editing some HTML. So this can be whatever you want, and then you're putting it together here. So this here is the nuts and bolts of how you can be changing text around to make something appear in the website that you're building. Now, if you look a little closer, you'll notice that these bits of text look different from each other. This one's bigger and this one's smaller. Why is that? Well, if you look here in HTML, you have these tags here that surround each bit of text. So each of these tags stands for something. This H1 stands for a header 1, and this P stands for a paragraph tag. So how do you know what all the HTML tags and what they do? They're looking online is one option, or our Codecademy docs goes into a lot of HTML detail so you can see all of the different tags that are available within HTML. Tags or elements to see what can you add in. And this is a whole big list of all of the different elements that you can have inside here. So we're seeing that there's an H1 and we're using a P tag. There's a bunch more. We're not going to talk about every element over the course of the live stream, but this is one place that you can go, and I'll just add the link in here, where you can go and find information about all of the tags that we're using on our Codecademy docs. So an H1 stands for a header 1. A header 1 is a big tag, and it makes the text show up very large. If we have a different size header, we can go and make this text bigger or smaller. So instead of having an H1, we could have an H2. And that's going to make the text appear a little bit smaller. This goes all the way down. You can have headers of size 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to have different sizes of text. Got this little nice rainbow effect going down right here. So a lot of different sizes of headers that you can make possible. And then having a header 4 is really kind of the same size as paragraph. So we can have our headers. And then this here is a paragraph. Paragraph is the easiest way to make text appear in a document. So you can add additional paragraphs. And as you add additional paragraphs, they come up next to each other. So they don't come up just next to each other. They come up as new paragraphs where you have one below the other, like you're making a new bit of text. Other common tags that you can see is you can use these strong tags to make something bold. And then you could see, make a strong tag to make content bold. And then you can see that this U shows up bold. Now, importantly with HTML tags, they all have a beginning and an ending. So as we made this new one here, we can see that it starts with this strong inside these angle braces. And to show that it's ending, we have the same syntax being the way that we're writing things, except we have this / before. That lets the that lets your browser know that you're starting something, a strong tag, you have some content, and then you're going to end it. So once you make one of these starting tags, you're making a promise often that you're going to end it with something. And if you don't have it, it'll start to get confused and you'll have some unexpected behavior because it doesn't know when it should be ending it. Great. So that's really the nuts and bolts of HTML. You have these tags that need to start and end, and they can contain content inside them. There's a few more other tags in the boilerplate we can see. One is just the big HTML tag that says we're going to start and end all of our HTML. We have this head tag, which shows a bunch of information about kind of the document itself. So like the title, and this here is how it should show up on different devices. And this here, which we'll get to in a little bit, is how we want our page to look and be styled. This last one here, body, is a way of just illustrating what is the main meat of our website, what's in the body there. So now that we have a little bit of a sense of kind of the nuts and bolts of HTML, let's take this design here and start to actually be building it, as this is the portfolio that we're going to be building out today.
Hey, Ben.
We can see first that we have this text here. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to jump in before we get started with this in the next section. Could you possibly make the font a little bigger on the editor so that people can see it better?
That is a good question. And I will zoom in a little bit here, which I think should help.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, cool. So now with our slightly larger font, let's go ahead and get into starting to build this out here. So first we'll go ahead and take this bit of text and then just copy this over into this header. So instead of saying hello Livestream, it has some more information about the portfolio person that we're building out here. Great. So we've gone and added that content in right here. So next, we want to go ahead and take this bit of text. So it's a little bit of a bio. Again, we're doing it for this person. If you're building your own portfolio, you should be writing text that describes yourself or your own interests. And that shows up just fine as well. All right, so far so good. We have this here, which is going to be a link, so some kind of button. We haven't talked about that yet, but a common way of having links show up, if you want to click on something and have and be able to look at something else, is to use what's called an anchor tag. Anchor tags are shown with an A. Same thing here, text goes inside. And then you have the closing tag to say that you're done adding your anchor. Now, by itself, this doesn't look different at all. It's not a link, it's just text. And that's because we need to give it more information about what should happen when you click on it. So far, each of these tags we've been adding has just been the tag itself. It's also possible within a tag to specify more information about where you want to be going or about anything else about the tag that might be relevant. We can see up here some attributes already that came inside. So this link has an href and a rel as two attributes. We're going to do the same thing for the anchor tag, and we're going to use this href to show what should happen when you click on it, where should it go? And this can be whatever website you want. So we're going to go and just put in that we're going to go to codecademy.com. And now we can see that this link shows up, and it's a thing that we can click on. When we click on it, we'll notice that it navigates us to Codecademy. Now, I cheated a little bit because in these editors, it's often hard to navigate directly. So if you try to put in a different link, like Google, you actually get some kind of error here. And this is because in this environment, we are still within the Codecademy ecosystem. So we can't go to and embed those other websites. What we can do instead is we can add a target attribute, which says what should happen when you click on it. And blank means open a new blank tab and go to that website in that new blank tab instead. And so that's a common paradigm you'll see with links is I don't want to interrupt all the work I'm doing. I just want to open in a different tab. Okay. So good, seeing from chat, good question. Yes, you can use either single or double quotation marks for any of these links in here. It is best practice to pick one and be sticking with it. You can see our default here has been that we come with these doubles, so I'll try to be using that as we build here. But it is a very good note that either of those works with HTML. Other languages are different. So some languages handle those differently, where you have to use either only single or only double and be consistent. Okay, so now that we have this link built out and we want to go and add in this image here. To add an image, we're going to break the rule that I just said, where you have to have a starting and an ending tag, because images don't really have any text that go inside them. For all of these tags, we've had things in between the paragraph here. Or for this header too, we've had text that goes in between that. For an image, we really just want the image itself. So we're going and we can just add the source here to say, where should the image be? So the image here, we're going to say that the source for it should be, it can be anything, any image that you want from anywhere on the internet. So if we go to some free image hosting site, like say Pixabay, we can go and look at a free royalty-free image, take that image, and then add it into our application. So this image can be any image you want. And we can see that it immediately shows up in our website right here. Okay, so now that we have an image in, we might want to make it the actual image for our portfolio. Again, this is the image I'm using. If you're building your own portfolio, you should be using your own image here so that you can have your own picture on your portfolio. So we'll go ahead and take this image here, which I will put the link in just in case you want to use the same one. And then we'll go ahead and add that to our portfolio. Great. So now we have all of the core elements built out from this diagram right here. Now, if you were building this out and say you were working at a company and your design team handed you this and said, we want you to build a portfolio page or website that looks like this. And you delivered them this website and said, well, I did it. It has all of the content that we should have. They'd probably look at you quizzically and say, well, what are you talking about? Like, this doesn't look at all like we said. Even though the content is all there, it looks very different from how this bit of content is supposed to look based on the design that we got from our design team. And the reason for that is because we haven't added any styling to our page. So our page has the basic styling that just came with this workspace. We need to edit that so that our page looks more like the page that we wanted to, that we built out from before. So we can go ahead and take a look at the CSS to figure out how to make that a reality. We see on this left panel, we have all of the files that come prepackaged in here. As I'm looking at it, I see this is untitled. We might want to call this something like portfolio so that we can go and find it later. This comes prepackaged with an index, scripts, and a style. So all of these are files that come with our portfolio, so we can go ahead and look at any of them and then change them to modify what our portfolio is going to look like. Back when we looked at this link, we saw that it was using this style.css href here, this style.css file, which we actually have right here. And the reason why we have this black background and white text is because we're specifying it right here. We have a background and a color that are actually specified inside this file. Now, we don't want it to be black and white. We want it to be mixing along here with what we have from our page here. So we want to go ahead and then add to change the background to this color right here. So we'll go ahead and change the background. And that will make the text show up as the same background color that we have from this link here. But the text is unreadable because the text is still white. We can see it's still there when we go ahead and move our mouse over it, but it's not showing up in a way we can see. So we're going to go in and then change the color to be this darker color here, and then update it to be this not quite shade of black, but this kind of darker blue color here that we see. Now, if you're new to this here, like what are all these letters doing here? How does that specify a color? So what this means is that we have, is called hexadecimal, which is one way of specifying colors. So we can go ahead and look at the color here. And there's actually a few different ways that this can be rendered. Hexadecimal is a base 16 number system, which shows you one way of understanding colors. You can also see the same color for just how much red, green, and blue it has that's relevant here. So there's a lot of depth that you can go into with adding colors. We have more of that in our UI UX course. For now, we're just going to be using these hex colors as colors and then going from there. Okay, so now this is looking a little bit better as compared with what our original design was, but it's not quite the same. So one big thing that's missing is all of our content here is top to down. So that's not really what we're looking for. We would like this here to be side by side instead. So that's what we're going to try to build out. So how can we make our content appear not just like top to down, but side by side? Another thing that's not quite right is this image feels way too big. So this image here is like much bigger than this image here. And this text here is too small. This text should be a lot bigger. So we have a lot of information that we want to change about this. So far, we've just been changing things in the main body. Now we want to edit this file, not just inside this, but come up with a new way of specifying that the styling should be different. We can do that using something called a CSS selector. That's going to look through all of our HTML file for something that matches the selector and then apply a different set of styling to it. How do we do that? We see one example here. This is an element selector, which is looking through our HTML for all of the body elements and then changing what their styling looks like. If we want to make this heading bigger, like it is here, this heading is much bigger, we want to find a way of saying, hey, take all of these H2s, these things, and apply a set of styling to make it bigger. We can do that by using the H2 element selector and then specifying that we want the font size to be bigger than it is already. Now, how do we specify making that bigger? So we can say that it's a certain amount of pixels. So we can use that as a baseline and we can make it really big and see here, okay, well, that makes it huge. So we could play around with pixels and then we could be figuring out the right size from there. A more common way to be using units for these is called a rem or REM. And so that stands for a relative M, which is relative to the base font size of your whole document. You'll see pixels thrown around. You'll also see rem as a way of measuring contents. In this case, it's about 16 pixels, so that should give you a kind of rough frame of reference, but there's no exact mapping, because it depends what font size you're using. So we want to go ahead and make the font size bigger here. So instead of just having the font size be 1 rem, which is about the same size as the text, we're going to make it 3 times as big. And that looks a lot better. So that matches up a little bit more with our text here. So it's not an exact process, right? But the going back and forth between the document that you're building and then the kind of design that you're trying to work with will help out and give you a sense of how you should be editing the file as you're putting it together. The next thing we want to do is make this image a little bit smaller, since it's a little unwieldy right now. It kind of takes up the entire screen when you're looking at it. So we're going to go and we're going to constrain this image size by having a selector for our image. And we're going to make the size a little bit smaller here. So instead of having this kind of like very large image size with whatever just happened to come with, we're going to specify that it should be exactly 320 pixels. And that's going to resize the image immediately here. Okay. So now that we have our image set, we want to go ahead and put these things side by side so that they're not just up and down, but match the design that we're trying to go for with this link here. How do we go and do that? Well, we can go and specify that we want these things to be laid out using what's called a flex box. We're going to just touch on the surface of that. There's a lot of different depth that you can get into, but we're going to go and use that as a way of making our content appear side by side. To facilitate that, we need to specify, well, what bits should be next to each other? Kind of this image is one bit and everything else is another bit. So we're going to go and take everything else and we're going to wrap it inside of a div. A div is a kind of container that doesn't make anything appear on the screen, but is a way of organizing our content to say that certain things should be grouped together. So nothing will happen differently when we run, but now our content looks a little bit different here. Okay, so now that we have our kind of div set, we want to specify that everything in that all of these things should be next to each other. But our body element is going to have our entire website. And we don't want to try to be saying that everything in the website should be next to each other. We just want to have this bio as its own separate block of information. How do we do that? We can use what's called semantic HTML to be adding a new section here. This is a way of differentiating our content so that as you're reading through, you'll understand what kind of content you're looking at. This is especially helpful if you're looking at content or reading content with a screen reader. That helps you organize content because maybe you're not actually looking at it, you are having something read it back to you. So having these bits of organization can make it a lot easier to understand how your content is organized as you're going through it. So again, nothing changes, but now we have this section. Now we can specify and say that we want this section to be laid out in a way that's side by side. And there's going to be a little problem later once we get to from the way we've done our CSS. Points in chat if you can go ahead and see if that's what that problem might be. But we'll go ahead and come to that once we get to it.
Ben,
okay. So we're going to add a new section. Yes, please come in.
Someone had a good question about section, the div, and the image being in between the section and the div tags. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have, you're saying we have a section tag and a div tag here?
Yeah, the user was wondering why the image tag is not inside the div, and it's in between the section and the div.
That's a great question. So as we build this, I'll go and show what the difference is between doing that. The short answer is our div is a way of blocking out that all of this content should be grouped together. The image should be grouped separately, and those are kind of two different blocks when we're trying to move them around. That's how we want them to play. Let's take a look and see what that does as we add in our flex box, because I think it's a great question. So we want to take the whole section, and we're going to say that the display is flex. As we do, we can see that all of the stuff we put in the div appears to the right of the image. Now, what if we hadn't done that? And what if instead we had gone and blocked out so that the image was inside of the div? If we had done that, we can see that we actually don't get that behavior we were looking for. The image and the text is still below each other because we haven't structured our HTML to know that these are two different categorizations, two different groupings of activity. So that's an excellent question. The best way to explore those things with any HTML is to just try them out and get to see how the behavior changes. But this question, the answer is because we want to be grouping these things together so that it moves around on the page in one block. Great question. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put this div back. And this little shortcut is quite useful. If you hold down the Option key and then just push up or down, you can move whole rows up and down, which is just an easy way if you want to switch things around. Okay, so now as we look at our website, we can see that this content is appearing side by side, which is fantastic, but it's really tight. It's like this here is right up next to this, which is kind of not fantastic. So we want to add a little bit of spacing between the image and the text so that it looks a little bit nicer. How do we do that? As we go into our CSS file, we can take this image and specify that we want a little bit of spacing between the image and then what comes next to it. Traditionally, this would be done using something like margin right. We can also use what is called a logical CSS operator property, which is a way of specifying how content should be laid out that also works with content that's supposed to read from right to left. So most content reads left to right, some content reads right to left, like Hebrew or Arabic. And so being able to talk about that content using logical CSS attribute can be helpful. All that being said, we can specify that we want the margin inline end to have some distance. And we can say it's 4 times whatever this kind of base text size is here. And that's going to go and add that padding. So for all intents and purposes, it's the same as changing kind of margin, the margin right property. So this is a way of handling it, just in case we want to add some more internationalization. Okay, so now we have most everything sorted, except our button is still just a link instead of this nice big blue thing that we had here. Now, how do we go and change that? A big part of working with CSS is just kind of iterating at things until you get something looking the way you want it to. So we can go back to our anchor tag, and we're going to want to add a little bit of styling here. So we're going to add some styling to this anchor tag so that it's going to show up a little bit different. Okay. So we're going to add some styling here so that our anchor tag is going to be a blue button that looks a little bit nicer than before. Okay, how do we do that? So we first are going to go ahead with adding, where is it? Okay, to say that we want the text decoration to be none. And this means we don't want it to be underlined or anything like that. So that's going to make it look more like we want. We're then going to want to specify the background color here, or the text color. So the color of the button text itself should be this same as the background color. And then the button color is this shade of blue. And that's the background of the button here. Note importantly, all of these different CSS attributes need to end with a semicolon. If you don't have that, everything starts breaking and it doesn't really understand what you're trying to do. So lots of good coding related memes about missing semicolons. This is certainly one place where it comes up. And we've been using all these hex colors because that's what we've just had in our design file. You can also just write in colors here that you know. It's a different shade of blue, but these here can just be colors that you specify. Okay, so it's already starting to look a little bit more like the button that we have here. We then want to go and, let's see, change our button to add a little bit of padding so we get that spacing. So we're going to go and add padding to it to say we want no left or right padding, but we want a little bit of padding, or sorry, the opposite here. We want a little bit of padding left and right, but we don't want any padding up and down. We're going to instead want to set the height property to specify that this thing has its own height that should be respected. When we add in a height, nothing actually changes right away. And that's because the default display for an anchor tag is inline. That means that it just tries to shrink as much as possible to fit in with content. If we wanted to have that height respected, we need to change the display to something else. In this case, we'll change it to inline flex, which will then respect the height property. We can see that the height property here is being respected, which is fantastic. So we can then go ahead and change the, but the alignment's wrong, excuse me. So we want to go ahead and align the items to be at the center. And then this is nice and centered. And then the last thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and change this border radius so that it looks more like a circle. And we can do that by changing the border radius attribute. And we can do something like, say, 1.25. Great. There's lots more playing around we could do. This still doesn't look exactly like it. We can be changing the font or the font size, the boldness, but this should get us in a good place to go. Okay. So this then gives us a pretty good start at what our initial bio looks like here. Before we go on and start adding to another section and exploring a little bit more we can do with our CSS selectors, let's see, Ted, are there any good questions from chat that we're looking at?
We definitely have a few. Let me give you some. For example, somebody was wondering about captions with the images, and if you had an image with a caption, how would that affect the divs that you're using in the image? I think they were wondering if we would need 2 divs or would just be 1 div with a caption.
That's a great question. So let's say we had text that like belongs to the image. We would then want to put the image and the text inside the same div so that it moved around as one block. That's a great intuition from the question because that's how that works there. Yeah.
And somebody was also wondering if there's a trick to remembering the difference between a margin and padding.
Oh, there are many, many tricks. I can say the best trick is always keep a Codecademy cheat sheet on hand, and then you can reference that for anytime you have questions about it. But honestly, the best answer is just practice. The more practice you have building these things out and going through and kind of like learning the material, the better equipped you're going to be working through it.
Great.
Okay.
And one last question
I saw,
from somebody.
Which is,
yeah, are you reading the question about the default alignment?
I was going to talk about the one about the padding, but go ahead for the alignment.
Oh yeah, I'll read your question for this question first. The users or your elements are aligned vertically by default in HTML, and your elements inline by default when you use Flexbox. They're wondering about alignments inline.
It's a good question. So I think generally inline elements are just going to show up next to each other, and that's going to be the default for like how things are inlined. I'll just defer back to, we've got lots more content on like Flexbox and alignment, and there's a lot of depth that you can get into. So I'd go check out our content for more information there. Great. Okay. So now we've got our basic page built out here. So we're going to want to go and add in some of the recent work below. And you'll see also, as we're starting to scrunch this image does get a little scrunched because I'm a little bit zoomed in. We'll talk at the end if we have time about one way of handling that, which I think is a pretty neat solution to that problem. Okay, so we want to add in some recent work. So we've got this recent work section. So we're going to add in another header. So we're going to take this recent work. We're going to go back to our index, and we're going to add another section that's going to reflect our recent work. So we're going to have a header. We'll say that's another H2. We're going to call it recent work. And then when we go and make this usable again, we can see that appears. Great. So we've got a recent work set up. Then we're going to want to go and add in some more of this rich content we have below. So we have an individual. So inside recent work, we have a bunch of stuff. We can use semantic HTML again to be organizing our content and say that each of those is going to be an article. Inside that article, it's going to start with another header that's going to have the title of whatever it is that we're working with. In this case, that's text message analysis for that first project. But notice when we go and build this, something a little weird happens. instead of showing up like top to bottom, like the question was coming from before, we have this appear like to the right, like all weird looking. The reason for this is our CSS was implemented a little bit naively. We were talking about changing how all of the sections worked. We were talking about how all of the anchor tags were supposed to be displayed. That was actually a little bit too wide because we have a new section, but we don't want this section to have flexbox. Maybe things inside will want to have that laid out, but we have been too over generic for how we've been defining our CSS properties. So now we're going to need to do a little bit of refactoring so we can add some more specificity. One excellent tool we have at our disposal is the class attribute. A class attribute is a way of giving more information to a specific bit of content you have. So we can take this section tag and say that its class is going here to be bio. Now, nothing changes when we run this, still just the bio, but when we go back to our CSS, we can then specify that we want not every section to be a flex display, but only a section that has a class of bio. Now, we can use a class selector by having a dot beforehand and then the name of the class. And when we go and run this here, we'll see that our text message analysis now appears below this, which is where we want it to show up. Great. While we're at it, let's do a little bit more refactoring because there's another couple of those cropping up. We've noticed that we've changed all of the images, but we probably just want to change the profile image. And we've changed all of the anchor tags, but we probably just want to change the button that we have at the top. So we can fix that by adding in some more classes where relevant here. So we can go and take in this body. We can take this image and call this a profile. And I've been a little bit lax here for making all of my quotation marks match. So we can take this profile image as a class name. Great. What does this not like? Spacing, I think. So it does give you warnings, which is helpful as you're trying to build things out. I got an extra space in there. Profile image. Okay. So again, I say nothing changes, but we've lost our image. Let's go ahead and make sure, there we go. So we have an extra, there we go. Okay. So it's helpful to be able to use the editor because it'll tell you if you've got any syntax wrong as you're writing it. Okay. So now we have this built out. We have our image that we can be specifying, and we can do that by going back and saying, we don't want to talk about all images, just these profile images. And that's going to go and change this sizing. Okay. Let's see. Great. So now we've gone and added that here. Because this kind of keeps, yeah, we'll get to that. Okay. So now let's go in and add some of our recent work. So we'll just go ahead and learn a little bit more about some HTML elements that we can be putting in here. So inside of our recent work section, we want to be grabbing all of this content and then just displaying it in roughly this form to the learner. So I'm going to go and just add what's called an HTML comment, which is stuff that doesn't actually show up, but it's just a way we can be using to be organizing this material. We can then go ahead and then add this here as a paragraph tag, and then just be slotting some of this information in. So that's a paragraph. We can make this feb show up as a strong tag, like we talked about before, to make it bold. And then we want all of these things to show up as a list. We can do that by, we could do that just by trying to like put line breaks behind them and doing it manually. It's going to be a lot easier to use what's called an unordered list, which is another HTML element, which will go and just display any list items with the li tag as bullet points. You can even then specify that you want list items to be appearing a little bit differently, depending on how you want your website to look. Also note, as I've been doing this, it's standard to be indenting content as you're encountering it here. And then last, we want to link to this GitHub repo. We no longer have a comment. And then we can go and add in a link, which is just going to be a reference to whatever link we have for this project. We can just say this is at, say, GitHub's Code Academy page, /Code Academy. And then we'll do the same target blank thing so that it shows up where we want it to. Okay, when we go and build this again, we can see that we have this looking up, but we can see we didn't actually remember to change our anchor styling. So we still get this big button for both of them. That's not what we want. So we're gonna go back and then add in a class here to this profile anchor to have it instead say that it's a button. Then back in our CSS, we can specify that we want the anchor tags to only apply to buttons. Now we should have only things that should be buttons show up as buttons. Great. Loading, we'll figure it out. Okay, sure. Okay, the last thing we'll want to do is just add a little image to this. And we can do that by just adding another image. We looked at how to find images. I've got this one stored here. You can use whatever image you want. And so we'll go and take right below, kind of at the bottom, the repo, we'll go and add an image that has a source, that has a self-closing tag. And it can be probably way too big. My goodness, that's a large image here. So we want to go and specify how big these images should be. Just like we specified that there are profile images, we can actually give this kind of image a way of talking about it by calling it something like, say, an article image, and then constraining it from there. First, we'll need to go back to our CSS and then say that this here is, in fact, an article image. Then we'll want to go and say, how big should this actual image be here? And right now it's way too big. So we're going to make it a little bit smaller. So we're going to go here onto our image, and we'll give it a slightly more reasonable size of, say, 512 pixels. And so again, that's the width property, and we'll set that to 512 pixels. Okay. Much more reasonable now that it kind of shows up like this size. And then the last thing we'll do on this part is we'll go and just make, similar to before, the image show up on the right instead of the left-hand side. To do that, we're going to specify that we want all of our articles to also have that flex layout. So every article is going to have a display of flex with a semicolon. And now this shows up next to each other. But we forgot to group all this stuff together. So it's trying to put all of them in a row. So we can go back to our index and then change this to make all these bits of content grouped together. And this back and forth is like 100% the key of what development looks like, is that you make a change, it changes something, you go back and you fix that change or make it look more like you want it to. Okay, one last thing that we're going to work on here, because this has been bugging me throughout it and probably has been bugging you if you've been looking at it, is, by goodness, this looks terrible with the smaller screen size, doesn't it? And our platform makes that very apparent because, you know, with this kind of 2-window layout, but this image like is all scrunched, you have to scroll over, like this is all like, it doesn't make any sense. If you're trying to look at this on a phone, it'd be a terrible experience. You'd have to scroll to the right on your phone to see all the content. That wouldn't be a good experience at all. Another weird thing is if we make our page bigger, it also looks kind of weird. Like this is all going out all the way and like kind of takes up too much room. The last thing we'll do is we'll fix those couple issues, and we'll do that by using what's called a media query. So a media query is a way of specifying that you want your website to look different for different sizes. So for this bio, we can say that we don't want the bio to always be showing things next to each other. If the screen's really small, we actually want the things to be on top of each other. So we can add a media query that says, in cases when the width of the page is below, say, 1024 pixels, we can say that the bio should not have a display, should have a display of flex, but its flex direction shouldn't be a row, which is default, but should instead be a column. And then for smaller pages, it starts to make a lot more sense. And you can kind of breathe out a sigh of relief as this actually looks like a real website you could look at on a phone or a small screen from the bio section. So that's immediately a lot better. But this part still doesn't make any sense. So we're going to want to give the same treatment where we go down and say that for articles, we have another media query. We're going to specify that the max width for anything that's 1024 pixels or smaller. Articles should also have a flex direction of column. And that's going to make this appear a lot more reasonable. One thing that'd be nice is if we could change this image, because it's like kind of weirdly not taking up as much room as it could. So we can give multiple things specificity inside these media queries. We can be taking article images and saying, hey, if you are inside a really small phone, you should actually just take up as much space as you can. Just take up the full width of the phone. And then this will make the images show up and take up a lot more space once we add in our units. Always important to add your units. And so now the image sizes, and it looks like a much more reasonable browsing experience. The last thing that we can go and kind of fix up is that we want this to not all be like taking up the whole width of the page, but maybe just like part of it. So we can take that same magic 1024 pixel number that we chose and then specify that for the body, we want the max width of the body to be that 1024 pixels. Don't take up more space than that, even if you happen to be on a bigger browser window. So when we expand this out, now we can see that it looks much more reasonable. And again, there's lots more that we need to be doing to make this kind of match up to what we were trying at the beginning. Like we could add some more padding here. This styling we could change for this here. We could make this bigger. We could add the lines in. So it's a never-ending project to be adding all of the styling that you're interested in. But this gets us to a much more reasonable approximation. One quick thing we can do that'll make it nicer though is to just be adding some centering. So we can go and say that using the margin and the auto feature, we can say all of this should be centered. So as you build out and make your website, all this content is centered. And then because it's bugging me, we can add a little bit of space. We could do other things like add more spacing here, that line in, add more recent work. So there's a lot of depth that you can get into, but we only have an hour this live stream to talk about all of HTML and CSS for Potfolio. So we're not going to be able to get into just everything, but we did review a lot. So just taking a minute or so to go over what we have learned right here. We have seen all of HTML, or a lot of HTML, and what you need to be building out the rough skeleton of a platform right here. So we looked at how to use divs to group things. We looked at how to create headings and paragraphs and sections and lists and images to be putting the building blocks of our website together. We then saw that that kind of, how it looked didn't match how we wanted it to look. Even though the content was all there, it didn't have the right feel to it. So we went and added some CSS to make this match the design that we were interested in seeing. So we went from our design and then added in different coloring, and we made things different sizes, and we could lay things out in different directions, and we could even specify things so it looked differently on different size devices. So lots of content that we went through right here. We've learned a lot over the course of the lesson here, and I'm excited to see people back on Wednesday when we go to be adding some JavaScript for adding a dark mode for some more interactivity. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Fede.
Thank you, Ben. Let's go through a quick couple questions before we end the live stream. There were some good ones here. So somebody was wondering about the code that you've been using for the whole workshop, and if that's something that we're going to be sharing at the end, or it's something that you need to update at the end, and maybe you can just explain a little bit how people can get to that code.
Sorry, if you are interested in, the question is if you're interested in looking at the code from this?
Yeah, the workspace. They wanted to make sure that they're gonna, have access to the workspace. Or where do they get the code?
Yes, so I'll put the link up again. The link to the workspace is inside the chat from the YouTube. That link was right up top. I'll go ahead and put it again right now. So if you're interested in looking at the code we ended up with, you can look at the link that's right in the YouTube chat.
Great. And another question that somebody had early in the stream was about creating these portfolio projects. And they were wondering, what are your recommendations for somebody that might not have as much work experience or degree experience, but they still want to showcase some of what they know when they're looking for jobs and internships?
Your projects are more valuable than your work or your experience on portfolios. Like, you can have as many degrees as you want to, but the question people are going to be asking is, what can you make? What can you build? So portfolios are great places to be showcasing the kind of work that you can produce as you're putting content together. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, with that, thank you everybody for attending today's live stream. I hope it was fun and useful experience for all of you. If you want to try more content on your own, just go sign up for a free account at codeacademy.com. We'll see you there. Tons of free content online, plus all of our community spaces ready to help you out when you have some questions. Don't forget to subscribe and to follow on our social media, whatever you are, in Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc. That's the best way to stay up to date with all new content. For example, next week, we're going to have some exciting Web3 content coming out. So follow us online to find out just when that content on Web3 drops. Thank you again, and I'll see you all Wednesday for part 2 of this workshop. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks so much. We'll see you there.
Okay, live stream is